Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Hey everyone, Dr. Mike here. Let me tell you why I'm excited about the conversation you're about to hear. I'm excited because we'll be talking about some basic management challenges every leader faces. So whether you're a first-time supervisor or you lead a large enterprise with hundreds of managers, or you're somewhere in between, we've got something for you today. As well as some of the basic blocking and tackling on delegation and decision-making, we're also going to talk about dreaming and how it factors into good leadership. That might sound a bit counterintuitive because some folks out there may be thinking that a good manager is there to execute the plan really well through efficient planning, crisp communication, and making sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed. And that's certainly part of being a successful manager. But my guest today is going to argue that everyone needs to dream bigger about their future. And as leaders, we need to help our people explore their dreams. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation that will make everyone think.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about better business results, stronger teams, more successful careers, and happier lives. Along the way, we hope to bust some biases, build some bridges, and have some fun. We're glad you're here. And now, our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build great teams. And sometimes we'll talk about new ideas in the world of business and commerce, and sometimes we'll just dig into some traditional ideas and help you apply them in your leadership context. I'm the author of the book, Mission First People Always, the definitive guide to balancing people and performance, and it's available on Amazon or wherever you buy books online. If you haven't read it, you really should, because it provides some great insight as well as some many practical tips, reflection questions, coaching ideas related to leadership in the setting you're in. I'm also a trainer, consultant, and coach focused on leader and team development. Now, let me remind you, as I always do, please subscribe or follow, leave a review, and tell a friend about our podcast. I do the podcast because I sincerely want to help people lead better and to get more done with and through the people around them. I believe everyone I invite to be a guest on the show can add value to your leadership journey. And I like to showcase talented people who care deeply about healthy organizations and good leadership as I do. And today is no exception. Let's meet our guest after the break.
Imagine a workplace where you feel connected to your work and colleagues, where people joyfully connect to the organization's purpose, mission, and leadership. At Workplace Peace Institute Leadership Academy, we bring evidence-based, brain-based learning to support leaders in creating life-affirming workplaces grounded in peace and dignity. Spark your leadership imagination at Workplace Peace Institute Leadership Academy. Together, let's reimagine work.
My guest today is Drew Jackson. Drew believes that anyone can become a leader if they have the proper motivation and a clear plan for development. He communicates this message in his new book, The Executive Leaders Handbook, and in his role as an executive coach and leadership trainer for a wide array of organizations, including Chick-fil-A, Lennox, Habitat for Humanity, and many others. Drew has been married to his wife, Heather, for 20 years, and they have 5 kids and 3 dogs. So a lot of activity going on in that household, I'm sure. And that all happens in Fort Worth, Texas. Drew Jackson, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. I'm glad you're here.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me.
Well, we chatted a little bit before we hit record, and I know it is hot in Texas. When I think of Fort Worth, I think of cowboys, big steaks, and hot summer days. Are my thoughts about Fort Worth right on?
You've got it. That's us in a nutshell.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're here. I I appreciate the work you do working with leaders. As I said in your intro, you've written a new book about leadership. And as a tease to the listeners, we're going to tell them how to get that new book, get your new book free. They just need to hang on a little bit and listen to our conversation. But we're going to give them, you're going to give them your book.
Yes.
I know you're a coach, you're a trainer, you work at a college and deliver leadership training, organizational development training to small and mid-sized businesses there in the greater Fort Worth area. So you're out in the trenches, and I appreciate that boots on the ground view. So we're going to cover 3 topics today, and I've called the episode the 3 Ds of management. And there's probably a lot of D words that would come up if we really worked on identifying all the things that managers need to do every day. But I've identified 3 for us to talk about today: delegation, decision-making, and dreaming. So we're going to dig in here. I want to bounce some questions off you and just talk to this audience like you're talking to folks there in Fort Worth, Texas. They're in the room talking with us about what it means to be a people-centered leader. I know that's where your heart is as well. So you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Let's do it. All right. Let's talk about delegation at first. Now, you've coached a lot of managers and leaders. Why is it so hard for leaders to delegate?
I'm sure there are a number of reasons why people fail to delegate or fail to delegate effectively. But I think the number one reason I've seen in my experience, and this is specifically in those coaching engagements. So I'm having one-on-one conversations with leaders. We're in the privacy and safety of that conversation, and you really get to hear the heart of people. And I've found that it comes down to identity. And so when you think about how a leader gets promoted, many times you were very good at your job, very good as an individual contributor. You got stuff done. That's how we relate to those that lead us is through our work product. You got stuff done. They said, you are great at getting stuff done. We're going to make you a leader. And you get into that role of leader and you say, hey, I get all of the attaboys and attagirls and high fives and great jobs when I get stuff done. And so we continue to function with that identity, and we fail to transition to the place where we're getting work done with and through others. And so if you can make that switch in your head that the value I bring to the organization now is not the work that I get done, but the work that I get done with and through others, then you are halfway there or more in delegation.
Do you think, I've always thought that managers who struggle with delegation don't trust their colleagues, their teammates, their direct reports to get the job done. So I'm wondering if trust plays into it and maybe fear plays into it. What if they don't do it the way I would do it, or they miss the deadline? The consequences the reflection on me would be horrible. How do you think fear and trust play into the lack of delegation?
Yeah, I think those are absolutely factors that play in. I was leading a training this last week. We were having an interactive conversation, and 2 of the leaders in the room said trust was the disconnect with them. That's what they struggle with as a whole, as a leader, is trusting their team. So that definitely plays into the equation. And at the end of the day, that's one of those things where you have to, I believe, you have to extend trust if you're truly going to empower your team. So it is that, that kind of Indiana Jones scene, that step of faith, right? At some point, you have to initiate trust and extend that trust to your team, which will hopefully empower them. They'll respond well to that. And also it's going to become reciprocal, and they're going to trust you more when you trust them. So it's definitely a factor, but it's something as leaders, we've got to remember that we always have to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? So what worked for you before isn't necessarily going to work for you in this new situation, this new organization, this new role that you're in. And so if trust is a challenge, you're going to have to challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zone and extend trust to others.
Yeah, I think it's also a vicious cycle. If you are a controlling leader, a micromanager, and you never let go, you're going to lose your best people who are most likely to be trustworthy and capable and able to deliver the results that you're after. They won't tolerate that. They'll move on. The employment opportunities for good people are out there. So why would I hang out with and accept a controlling, micromanaging leader hovering over me and never letting me do anything of substance?
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. And, you're kind of getting into the insecure leader, which is just really the greatest challenge of any leader, is to fight through those insecurities. But the thing is, some people want those lower performers that they can control on their team. I mean, yes, you'll run off the high performers that have an opinion, but maybe that's what you want because you're insecure. And so once again, you've got to reflect. You got to stop and ask yourself, why am I so challenged by a high performer on my team that asks a lot of great questions? And is that that's probably a me problem that I need to look in the mirror with and make sure that I'm not operating out of insecurities.
Yeah, I agree. The leader who surrounds himself, herself with sycophants and yes men and women who just smile and nod every time the boss says something will never be anything more than mediocre, in my let's move on. So what do we do about it? What do you tell your coachees, people, leaders you're working with, about how to delegate, maybe by using some different approaches based on the different people on your team? I'm assuming one size doesn't fit all when it comes to distributing task and authority when you delegate work. What do you advise people on that?
Yeah, great question. So with that, I tell folks, if people are failing to execute, so you want to kind of deal differently with different folks. But if people are failing to execute on something that you put in there on their plate, then it really comes down to, I've found, two reasons. They're either unwilling or unable. The individual that you delegated to is unwilling to do that. Maybe they think it's stupid. Maybe they think it's pointless. If you're working with sales professionals and you say, hey, I need you to update your conversations in our Salesforce CRM so that we have that information. And they say, that's a waste of my time. I've never done that. I don't want to do that. That would be a case of unwilling. Yep. And then you have other scenarios where a person's simply unable. They don't know how to do what you're asking of them. They don't have the skills yet to do that. And those are generally, people are going to fall into one of those two categories. And I challenge my coachees. I say, just ask them the question. You can say, hey, I noticed that you weren't able to hit this deadline that we were talking about. And I don't want to make assumptions around why that happened, but in my experience, it usually comes down to a person's either unwilling, they don't really want to do it, or they're unable to do it. They don't know how to do it. Which one would it be for you? And then just be quiet in the awkward silence and let them answer for themselves. And then based on their response, you can make the appropriate decisions. But I like to always, I think it's good to have healthy conflict, have those conversations, those tough conversations with our team. But instead of assuming, because many times, I'll speak for myself. As much as I want to always assume the best in people, sometimes I can assume they have a bad attitude, right? Well, the problem is they just have a bad attitude and they don't want to do the job. Well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe they really don't know how to do it. and they're just being stubborn, and they don't know how to ask for help. And I just need to help them, right? I need to shore up their competencies in this area. And so that's why I like to ask people and let people answer for themselves.
Yeah, there's a great great line. In fact, it may very well be my favorite line in the book Crucial Conversations. And it's the question we're encouraged to ask ourselves when we're on the receiving end of behavior that, tempts us to start telling this story and going down this crazy bad thoughts about the other person trail. And that question is, why would a reasonable, rational, decent human being say or do what that person just said or did? And it causes you to stop in your tracks, and you open the curiosity part of your brain and say, gee, that's a really good question. What are the reasons? One reason might be they didn't have the resources they needed to do the job. One reason might be they weren't feeling well. One reason, and you start going through those myriad reasons, and it just kind of changes your own mindset. And then you're off your evil story and villainous story about that person, that they're just no good and worthless, and get you back in a place of dialogue and willingness to encounter that person, engage that person, and really try to find out through a conversation.
Yeah, that's so good. That's fantastic. I love that.
Okay, let's move on to our second D. Decision making. Managers or human beings make hundreds of decisions each day, if not thousands or tens of thousands over the course of a year. But some decisions are really much more important than others. When we get into leadership roles, the stakes are always higher. So how do we think about decision making from a leadership perspective in a way that is most useful?
Yeah, well, I think you make the point that all of us make decisions on a regular basis as, individuals, and those decisions generally affect us individually. When you're in a leadership role and you make decisions, those decisions now affect other people. And hopefully, as a leader, you recognize that the decisions that you're making are affecting other people, and maybe even other departments within your organization. And so decision making is vital, and we've got to think about the interrelatedness of these decisions. We've got to, and I teach folks in my trainings this concept of being able to zoom out and see the 50,000 foot view, but then be able to zoom in and see, okay, this decision that is good for the organization, good for my team, what are the other consequences of this decision? Who's it going to affect outside of it just being good for me? And the great leaders, when they make those decisions, they recognize that, hey, this is the best decision for the organization, but it's really going to affect the sales department and their compensation. I need to have that conversation with them, get the buy-in from them. I need to maybe have them help me put together a plan for how we're going to roll out this decision, and just recognizing the interrelatedness of that decision. And so it's vitally important. And the higher you go up in leadership, I had an executive that I reported to. He told me this. He said, the higher you go up in leadership, the tighter the decisions are. They're 51-49, right? 51% could go this way, 49% this way, and you're making that judgment call in the moment. And that's just stuck with me. The higher I go up, the decisions get more difficult. And so to have a process, to have maybe some understanding, or do some research, or read some books, or listen to podcasts around decision making is going to really help me as I grow up in leadership.
Yeah, and we sort of playfully say to people, that's why they make the big bucks.
Yeah.
But that's why they make the big bucks, because the decisions are harder. They have greater consequences. There's less black and white and more gray and nuance. So Drew, how do we do it better? How do we become a good decision maker in the context we're in, whether it's an executive role where they're the decisions are 51-49 almost always, or as we're rising, maybe we're earlier in our career and we're just trying to get the hang of this. What advice do you give people?
Yeah. Well, let me say this first. I think, um, the great decision makers versus the average decision makers are the great decision makers make decisions. That's the big differentiator there is, and there's a great Harvard Business Review study, a 10-year study on the top executives of executives. And one of the 4 characteristics that they had was that they were decisive. And if you read the article, it says that they didn't always make the right decision, but they weren't afraid to make the decision. And so you as a leader, you've got to make a decision. Your team is waiting on you. You're wasting time if you're indecisive for your organization. People aren't working, they're stalled out, or they're working on the wrong things. So we've got to get comfortable with making decisions. Now, I'll give you a couple tips on making decisions. And I'll just, from my own life and my own decision-making process, decisions got much easier once I started employing strategic planning in my life, in my business. Once I have a strategic plan and I know where I want to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 1 year from now, decisions get much easier because you've narrowed how many options you have. And so, some tips would be, you can go through this process, ask yourself, where do I want to be 1 year from now? Where do I want our organization to be? Where do I want our team to be? And then following that, ask yourself, what is the current reality of where we're at right now? What's going on, and where do I find myself currently as it's related to this place that I want to be? And then you do gap analysis, fancy word for what's the difference, right? What's the gap in between where I want to be and where I'm at currently? And then I lead my clients to this. Ask yourself, what are the options? What are all of my options? So if I'm making a decision, what are all the options? I was actually just teaching on this yesterday, and I was using a weight loss example. So let's say a year from now, you want to be down 20 pounds. Where are you at right now? Well, you're 20 pounds heavier than where you want to be, right? So we know the gap is 20 pounds. Now, what are your options? And I threw out there, I could get liposuction, right? I could not eat for a month straight. Now, those are ridiculous options, but it's a good exercise to just think through what is every single option, no matter the cost, no matter what it is. Think through all those options, and as you write them down, take the final step and ask yourself, which option will I take? And if you do that, I'm promising you, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to make more confident decisions because you've thought through where you're trying to go, where you're at currently, how to bridge the gap, and then you're making the final decision of what action you'll take to start that process. So that's the process I use, and I love it, and it helps my clients too.
Yeah, I think that GROW process, and basically what you just talked us through was GROW guide to making those better decisions. And I think having a structure for how to think about something gets people moving and forces us to consider those options and then ultimately make a better decision. Before we move on to dreaming, when you said something that really caught my attention earlier, and I didn't want to jump in and interrupt you, but you said good leaders make decisions. And I just got back from Normandy in France last week. And first time I was there on Omaha Beach and Pointe du Hoc, and just experiencing all that was a powerful, powerful experience. And I got into it. I was reading as much as I can. And one of the things I came across was the fact that one of the reasons the Allies were successful, first of all, Eisenhower made a really big, hard, consequential decision to kick off D-Day when he did. But the second part of what really made the difference was when the Allied forces got on the ground, the frontline leaders, the sergeants, the lieutenants, the captains were able to, the soldiers themselves were able to make in the moment tactical decisions about moving and not moving and taking initiative, whereas the German forces had to wait for approval from higher headquarters, Hitler himself in some cases, to counterattack, to move, to respond to what was going on in front of them. And thank God, we all know the outcome of that, and we live in a free world for the most part. And so that just, the point you were making, just I saw it on the ground in Normandy, what that looks like and what happens if we don't let people make decisions.
Yeah, that's so good. What a great example.
So let's finish our conversation talking about dreaming. I've never given this much thought, but why is it important for leaders to dream and dream with their teams?
Yeah, well, so I spent some time in my 20s just listening to every webinar, reading books about really defining your personal life purpose. And I came up with for myself this line that, if we were on video right now, people would see on the wall behind me, it said, "My dream is to help you live yours." And I'm so passionate about that. I'm so excited about asking this question of people. And I feel that it's why I'm on earth, is to help people really define their dream and hopefully take action towards living it. So in that pursuit, as it relates to leadership, I've found that there are so many people that I ask this question of, that they might be 30, 40, 50 years old and say, I have never been asked that question in my life. I don't know. I've never thought about it. And so I say, well, take some time and just think about it and think about your response. What's your dream? And I think it's so important for a number of reasons. It motivates you, it inspires you to move forward. But from a leadership perspective, leading a team, it's going to build trust. It's going to show that you care about the whole person and not just what they can produce for you and for the organization, but you care about what it is that's important to them. And so motivation tremendously goes up. And so those are some of the reasons why I think it's vitally important to ask this question of your team. And you can't, I don't think it's right to ask your team that question until you've asked yourself that question and come up with a loose answer. I mean, I'm pretty proud of my little one-line slogan, but that thing took me years and years and years to come up with and write. And so you don't have to have some line, but an idea, a general idea of what your dream is, and it could be, I've heard it asked, if money were not an issue, what would you do? I don't like that as much because it is an issue and I like to deal in reality. So what is your dream? What is it? Do you want to raise great kids? That's a fantastic dream. I think every single person should have that as part of their dream. Just ask the question with no follow-up and see how a person takes it and how they go with it.
Yeah. Dreams inspire us. Dreams energize us. Dreams point us in the right direction. We talk about mission, vision, values all the time, but maybe it would be good to talk about dreaming more. Now, in light of that, in light of everything you've just said, what I just said, what if someone on your team, you ask that question, you take Drew's advice, you ask the question, and then their dream is to leave the company, to go somewhere else, to do something else entirely different, and you're left with a vacancy to fill. Is that a good thing?
Well, it can be.
How
Because
so?
if a person is on your team, and they're picking apart everything that you do, it's probably because they're frustrated with life. It may have nothing to do with how you're leading the team. You could be the best leader ever, but they're coming into the organization every day frustrated because they know that there's something else they want to do, but they don't know how to think about what that other thing is, or how even to take action towards that. And so in my experience with asking this question, I tell the organizations that I work with, I tell them the very first question when I engage in coaching with your leader is I'm going to ask them what their dream is. And sometimes their dream is not in the organization. And I'll tell you why that's great for you. Two reasons why it's okay if someone says their dream is to start their own company or get skills in another area. The one, as I alluded to, is the frustration factor. You can get a lot of addition by subtraction in organizations if the frustrating people, the ones that are frustrated and are causing frustration within the organization, choose to exit. And they say, you know what? This isn't ultimately where I want to be, and I'm going to pursue that thing. And in those cases, it's fantastic. And the owners of the company come to me and they say, you know what? And they use that phrase, addition by subtraction. We lost them, but the team morale immediately went up and we got greater output from the people that are still here. So that's one factor. The other factor is if someone, let's say that I was just talking to a person the other day, that they manage in a manufacturing setting. And I asked this question of them, and they said, I've always been super interested in like the CSI stuff. And this person is in their 20s, or maybe it was just like early 30s, 30 years old. And I said, okay. I said, that's just a 4-year degree to like do blood spatter. That's like a 4-year degree. Because one of my kids was looking into it. And I said, you could get that in 4 years. I don't know, school. I said, look, you're 30 years old. Even if it took you twice as long because you're doing it part-time to get your education, you're under 40 by the time you start that new career. Let's go. Let's take some action. And the reason why that's good for the company as well is a person that is moving towards a goal is excited every day. And now that job that they have means something, the current job, because they go, I'm showing up to this manufacturing leadership job every day because that's how I pay for the school, which is how I'm going to ultimately do my dream. And so they're highly motivated, they're engaged, they're having more fun because they're taking action towards their goal. And so those are the reasons why. And I'll tell you one other reason. I've had so many people in coaching sessions tell me that they're going to quit. And my loyalty, even though the employer is paying me, my loyalty is to the coachee. And so if they say I'm going to quit, I say, okay, let's talk about it. What does that look like? And we might put together an entire plan of their exit strategy and how they're going to go about it. And they never quit, and they're still with the organization to this day. So, people, it's great to ask your team that question and just do it with no fear and no judgment, and encourage them to take action towards their goal, and see what happens with it. Nobody's captured with us. They don't have to work for us forever, and we don't expect them to. So if you do this, you're going to get more out of the people that stay, and the ones that leave, it might be a good addition by subtraction to your organization. So that's my response to that concern.
Love it, Drew. You've said a lot. I don't know if you said it all, but you've said a lot. And I warned you that I always end every interview with this question. You work with frontline leaders, you work with mid-level managers, you work with a lot of people on a weekly, daily basis. So what's one good piece of advice that you would give my listeners that they could apply immediately and start seeing an impact in the coming days or weeks?
So yeah, this is a great question. So many different directions I would love to go with it. But the number one that comes to mind, it's very practical, is begin having one-on-ones with your team. If you don't already, begin meeting with them one-on-one. I would recommend weekly. And you say, hey, we're in a fast-paced industry. I don't have time to do that. Schedule 15 minutes with them. It doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to even be 30 minutes. schedule 15 minutes with them to check in with them, have a conversation, make sure that the priorities that you see as a priority for them, that they're in alignment with those priorities. And I promise you, you will save time for yourself and you'll have a lot less problems if you get in the habit of and maintain the one-on-ones that you have on the calendar. That's the practical step I would take if I were your listeners.
Great advice. Now, let's give away, what do you think? 20, 30,000 copies of your new book?
Let's do it. We can do it.
You've been very generous here. Your new book is called the Executive Leaders Handbook, and you are giving folks the opportunity to download a free digital copy of this book that covers all the things we've talked about today and much more. I've got a copy. I'm looking through the table of contents, and there are just so many very practical aspects of a leader's life that get addressed in that book with good, positive, straightforward advice. I love it. So how do people get your book?
Yeah, they can get it by going to the executiveleadershandbook.com. And if you go there, you can get either the PDF or an audio version of the book, absolutely free. And I wrote the book as a leave behind for my clients. When we're done with our coaching engagement, I wanted them to have all the tips that I had shared with them. And so it's my gift to you, the executiveleadershandbook.com, totally free. You can get a copy today.
Very generous. And I would encourage my audience to do that. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's free and it's good. Two things that are favorites of mine. So Drew, thank you for being a great guest on the Mission First People Always podcast. I've put all of your contact information in the show notes. I would encourage my guests to visit your website, to connect with you on LinkedIn, follow you, whatever you're doing, get the book, because I think you've got good things to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's really been a joy having this conversation with you today.
So to my audience, I don't know where you're at, but I'm always encouraged by people who want to make a positive difference in the world by making a positive difference in the lives of the people around them. They want to do great things with, through, and for people. They're out there. We are out there. And that's why I do this podcast, to help you be better and hopefully to make the world a better place, even if it's through one leader at a time. So until next time, mission first, people always.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.